To analyze the latest escalation between the United States and Iran, we're joined by former U.S. Assistant Secretary of State of Arms Control, Frank Rose, live from Alexandria, Virginia. Thank you, sir, for joining us. Sir, the United States says these latest strikes are aimed at protecting freedom of navigation in the Strait of Hormuz. From a strategic standpoint, what does this signal about Washington's priorities?
Well, what I would say is from the beginning of the conflict, reopening the Strait of Hormuz has been a war aim for the United States. So it does not surprise me that in response to Iranian attacks on shipping, the United States would conduct military strikes in response. The bigger issue is that the framework agreement signed a few months ago in Pakistan never really established a clear, agreed understanding of the strait's status. This ambiguity, in effect, is an open invitation to renewed conflict. My view all along has been that there have been deep, unresolved disagreements between the US and Iran on the core issues, status of the straits, Iran's uranium enrichment program. So I'm not particularly surprised at what we're seeing now with this renewed conflict.
Okay, if Iran follows through with retaliatory strikes, what are the risks crisis expanding into a broader regional conflict?
Yeah, according to some press reports, Iran has already conducted some strikes. Now, I have not confirmed that independently. I think the question is we'll have to see. Will this be just another tit for tat and then we stop and de escalate? Or will this continue to expand? President Trump, in his statements at the NATO summit, seemed to indicate that the ceasefire was, quote, over. So we'll have to see. I think the next hours and days will give us a better understanding of where we're going.
What does Washington define as a victory here, in your opinion? Destroying capabilities, changing Iran's behavior, regime pressure, because those are very different goals. And how does the US avoid a situation where a tactical win becomes a strategic disaster?
That is the really key question. If I were in the White House providing advice to the president, there would be really two strategic objectives for me. First, reopening the Strait of Hormuz to international traffic without any interference by any party. And secondly, preventing Iran from pursuing a nuclear weapon, specifically preventing Iran's ability to enrich uranium. So we'll see, but that, based on kind of my thinking, is what I'd be recommending to the president. Whether it is doable, we'll have to see.
Sir, is there a danger that every strike creates a justification for another strike, trapping both sides in a cycle they cannot control?
Absolutely. I mean, that's the challenge with war. Once the bullets start and once the escalation begins, it's very hard to put the genie back in the bottle. And frankly, I don't think either the United States or Iran wants a renewed full scale conflict. But again, given the tensions and the military engagements, I don't know if either side can control it. We will have to see. It's
What
a
do you
very
think?
dangerous.
All
Go
right,
ahead.
sir,
Sorry.
what do you think is the biggest myth or the biggest miscalculation or misunderstanding about this conflict?
Well, I think going back, I think the United States thought they could take the regime out, similar to what they did in Venezuela. But one of the things we've learned is that this regime in Iran is a very ingrained regime, and they are prepared to take a lot of pain, much more pain than the United States is prepared to take. For the United States, it's an issue of oil prices and access to the Strait of Hormuz. For the Islamic State, it's an existential threat because they're fighting for the survival of the regime. So I think that was probably the biggest miscalculation on behalf of the United States. Secondly, the closure of the Strait of Hormuz. I mean, the United States has been wargaming for the last 30 years, a potential war with Iran, and one of the first things they do in a conflict is try to close the strait.
All right, sir. If these strikes were meant to deter Iran, why hasn't deterrence worked so far? And what is the end game? What exactly does the U.S. and Iran wants Iran to do differently tomorrow morning?
Yeah, I mean that's the real question. I mean, um, I think, again, the Trump administration went into this war thinking that they could take out the senior leadership of the Islamic regime, and then they would be replaced with people more willing to deal with the United States. But I think, again, the problem is that the regime is prepared to take a lot of pain, much more pain than the United States is prepared to take. So we're at a standoff. I don't know how it gets resolved. And I have a feeling that over the next couple of months, we could get into a cycle where we have a military engagement, it de escalates, and then we have another military engagement because the fundamental issues between the United States and Iran are deep. Uh, the state of the regime, the enrichment program, and the state of the status of the Gulf. So, again, because the differences are so deep, I see it very difficult that they're going to be able to come to a reasonable accommodation. I could be wrong, and we will see.
Is Washington prepared to admit that military strikes alone cannot solve a political problem? And are U.S. leaders underestimating Iran's willingness to absorb damage and retaliate?
Well, I think U.S. leaders from the get go have made a major mistake in thinking that we could bomb the Iranians to do what we wanted them to do. And that's part of the problem. The other part of the problem is there was no clear political objective from the get go on the U.S. side. The objectives kept on changing. And one day it was regime change, another it was destruction of their military. So the bottom line, in my opinion, is we need to figure out from a U.S. perspective what our political objective is, whether military force can achieve that uh, objective, and if not, how do we use diplomacy to achieve the objective? And again, if I were recommending this, making recommendations to the president, I would say we need two things. We need to keep the strait open to all international traffic, and Iran needs to stop its uranium enrichment program. You don't need an enrichment program to have a civil nuclear program.
All right, so my final question would be that everyone says that they want to avoid a wider war, but history shows that wars often begin when leaders believe they're still in control, right? Who is really holding the steering wheel right now, in your opinion?
That is a good question. But if you were to ask me to make a call, I would say because the Iranian regime is prepared to accept much more pain than the United States is, I would say I wouldn't necessarily say they're in the driving seat, as we say in the United States, but what I would say is their pain threshold is much higher than the pain threshold in the United States with regards to this war, because in the United States, this is not a very popular war. In Iran, fundamentally, this is an existential threat to the regime, and the Iranian regime will bear unbearable pain in order to maintain its power. So, on that point, I would say the Iranians are probably in a stronger position.
That was a bittersweet and beautiful answer that you just gave. Thank you, sir, for joining us.
It was a pleasure to be with you.
Same here.